Julian thought he knew the architecture of his marriage. He believed it was a structure built on shared dreams, even if the foundation felt strained of late. He didn't know the blueprints had been redrawn without his knowledge, that the load-bearing walls of trust were hollow. Within 3 minutes, standing outside a sterile hospital room, he would learn that the home he thought he was building was, in his wife's eyes, nothing more than a temporary shelter she was planning to condemn. The quiet hum of the hospital corridor was a poor substitute for the storm gathering in his heart. Would you do me a quick favor? If you enjoy stories about quiet strength and seeing arrogance get its just desserts, I'd be so grateful if you'd hit that like button and subscribe for more. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, let's return to that hospital corridor, where a life was about to be dismantled and rebuilt, all from a single overheard whisper. The scent of antiseptic and wilting flowers clung to the air, a cloying combination of clinical despair and forced cheer. Julian stood just outside room 304, his hand hovering over the door. He had a small bouquet of Clara's favorite freesias, their delicate perfume a futile protest against the hospital's sterile signature. He'd rushed from his office, a place no one in her family truly understood, his mind a whirlwind of concern. The call had been vague. Clara had fainted at the gym. They were running some tests. It was probably just dehydration. But the knot in his stomach had been tightening with every mile he drove. He paused, not wanting to barge in if a doctor was present. Through the small rectangular window in the door, he could see her sitting up in bed. She didn't look pale or distressed. In fact, she looked animated, her hands gesturing as she spoke to a young nurse who was checking her IV drip. Relief washed over Julian, so potent it almost buckled his knees. She was okay. He smiled, ready to push the door open, to hold her and feel the solid reality of her presence. Then he heard her voice, muffled but clear enough. "Oh God, don't even get me started on the bills," Clara said, her tone a practiced blend of weary drama and confidential gossip. The nurse, a kind-faced woman in her late 20s, murmured something sympathetic. Julian's hand froze. It was an odd thing to say to a stranger, but Clara had always been theatrical. "It's just a nightmare," Clara continued, and the sound of her sigh was sharp enough to cut. "My husband, Julian, he's a good man, bless his heart. He really is. But he's just not ambitious, you know? He works this little analyst job, gets his little paycheck. We get by, but for something like this, an unexpected hospital stay?" She laughed, a brittle, ugly sound that had no humor in it. "This is going to wipe us out. I'll probably have to ask my father for help again. It's just so humiliating." The nurse made another soothing noise. Julian felt the blood drain from his face. The bouquet of freesias suddenly felt impossibly heavy. "He just doesn't get it," Clara went on, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper Julian had to strain to hear. "He lives in this little world where his spreadsheets and his numbers are enough. He has no concept of what it takes to build real wealth, to have security. I'm tied to a man with the soul of a clerk, while I have the needs of, well, of someone used to more." She sighed again, a performance of profound suffering. "Honestly, I don't know how much longer I can do this. The financial strain is one thing, but the lack of vision, it's killing me. This little health scare is just a giant, flashing neon sign telling me I need to make a change, for my own survival." The world tilted. The fluorescent lights of the hallway seemed to flicker and dim. Julian's mind, a place of order, logic, and meticulous calculation, went utterly silent. He felt nothing and everything at once. The man she described, the simple, unambitious clerk, the financial burden, the man with no vision, was a stranger to him. A caricature, a ghost conjured to elicit sympathy from a nurse. He looked down at his own hands. They were steady. He wore a simple, steel-banded watch, not the gold monstrosity his father-in-law, Richard, favored. His suit was well made but not ostentatious. He drove a reliable sedan, not a luxury sports car. These were all data points, pieces of evidence her family had used for years to construct their narrative of him. Julian, the disappointing husband. Julian, the man who was not enough for their Clara. He had always assumed Clara knew better, that she saw past the quiet exterior to the man he truly was. He thought she understood his patience, his strategy, his deliberate and methodical approach to life and to their future. He believed she was his partner in a long game. Now, hearing her words to the nurse, he realized the devastating truth. She wasn't his partner. She was just another spectator in the audience, watching a play she didn't understand and complaining about the lead actor. She didn't see his patience as a strategy, she saw it as a weakness. She didn't see his quietness as strength, she saw it as a lack of ambition. And the money she thought they didn't have. A slow, cold anger began to replace the initial shock. It was not a hot, explosive rage, but a chilling, crystalline fury. It clarified everything. The years of subtle digs from her family, the condescending offers of help from her father, Clara's constant dissatisfaction with their home, their car, their vacations. It wasn't just them, it was her too. She was the architect of the narrative. He took a slow, deliberate breath. He looked at the flowers in his hand. They were for a woman who didn't exist. The wife he worried about, the partner he cherished, was a fiction. The woman in that room was a stranger. Quietly, he backed away from the door. He turned and walked down the corridor, his footsteps making no sound on the polished linoleum. He passed the nurse's station. The young nurse Clara had been speaking to glanced up and gave him a small, pitying smile. She thought she knew his story. She thought he was the simple, struggling husband. The humiliation she mentioned wasn't the need to ask her father for money. The humiliation was Julian himself. He walked out of the automatic doors and into the fading afternoon light. The city air felt thin. He got into his unassuming sedan, a car his brother-in-law Marcus had once called a perfectly adequate little box. He placed the bouquet of freesias on the passenger seat. Their scent now seemed funereal. For a long moment, he just sat there, the engine off, his hands resting on the steering wheel. His mind, the powerful, analytical engine he had so carefully cultivated, began to work. It processed the new data, the devastating input from room 304. It recalibrated variables, recalculated outcomes, and charted a new course. The emotional shock was an earthquake, but the foundation of his character, his integrity, his patience, his hidden strength, held firm. He reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a small, worn, leather-bound journal. It was old and unmarked, the kind of thing someone might use for idle thoughts or sketches. To Clara and her family, it was just another one of his quaint, unimpressive affectations. He ran his thumb over the soft, creased leather. Inside its pages were not idle thoughts. Inside was the blueprint, not for a marriage, but for an empire. The very empire he had been building, quietly and secretly, for her, for them. He had always planned a grand reveal, a moment he would take her hand and show her the fortress he had built around them. A fortress of such immense security and wealth that all her family's petty snobberies would evaporate on its walls. He had imagined her surprise, her joy, her pride. That imagined future now lay in ruins, a casualty of a few careless, cruel words spoken to a stranger in a hospital room. The fortress was still there. It was real, it was vast, and it was his. But he now understood it could never be hers. You don't invite a demolition crew into the palace you've just built. He put the journal back in his pocket. The cold anger had now settled into a profound, unshakable resolve. The game had changed. His strategy, once focused on a shared victory, was now about survival and justice. He would not be cruel. He would not be vindictive. He was not his wife's family. But he would, with the same methodical precision he applied to everything else, dismantle the false narrative they had built around him. He would show them the man with the soul of a clerk, and they would learn, to their profound and everlasting regret, just how much that soul was worth. He started the car. The engine was as quiet and unassuming as he was, and just as powerful. The dinner had been 3 months before the hospital incident, a perfectly preserved diorama of his life with Clara's family. It was Richard and Eleanor's 35th anniversary, held at their sprawling, ostentatiously modern house, a place of sharp angles, cold marble, and vast expanses of glass that seemed to judge the manicured nature outside. Julian always felt like an exhibit in that house, a curious specimen of mediocrity that the family would occasionally poke with a stick. He had driven them in his sedan, of course. Clara had spent the entire drive sighing. "Can't you at least use the valet?" she'd asked as he pulled into a spot on the street, a block away. "It's embarrassing to have to walk up." "It's a beautiful evening, Clara. A little walk will be nice," he'd said, his voice calm. It was a test, and he knew it. Everything was a test. Walking up the long, slate pathway, they passed her brother Marcus's brand new Porsche, gleaming under the artfully placed landscape lighting. Marcus was standing by the door with his father, Richard, both of them holding glasses of scotch that probably cost more than Julian's suit. "Julian! Glad you could make it," Richard boomed, his voice carrying the false bonhomie of a man who believes his own generosity is a landmark. "Had to park on the street, I see. We're overflowing with success in the driveway tonight." He winked at Marcus, who smirked into his glass. "It's good to see you, Richard. Happy anniversary," Julian said, ignoring the barb. He had learned long ago that the best defense against their brand of attack was a calm refusal to engage. It infuriated them. Inside, the house was filled with Richard's business associates and their wives, a flock of peacocks preening and assessing one another. Eleanor, Clara's mother, drifted through them all, a ghost in shimmering silk, her smile as thin and brittle as a pane of ice. She kissed Clara's cheek, then gave Julian a nod so slight it was barely perceptible. "Julian, you're looking, well," the unspoken addendum, "for you," hung in the air. Dinner was an ordeal, a masterclass in humiliation by 1,000 cuts. They were seated at the main table, a place of honor that Richard used as a stage. The conversation, steered by him, was exclusively about money, acquisitions, and status symbols. "Marcus just closed the deal on the old Henderson property downtown," Richard announced to the table. "Going to level it and put up a luxury condo tower. The boy's a killer." Marcus, a softer, younger copy of his father, basked in the praise. "The financing was tricky, but we strong-armed the banks. You have to know how to speak their language." He glanced at Julian. "It's not about spreadsheets, it's about leverage." Julian took a slow sip of his water. He knew the Henderson property deal intimately. He knew Marcus had overpaid by at least 15%, that the zoning variances were a nightmare, and that the financing he'd secured was at a predatory interest rate. Julian's own firm, the one nobody knew about, had passed on the deal 3 months prior, deeming it a catastrophic risk. He said nothing. "And what about you, Julian?" Eleanor chimed in, her voice sweet as poison. "Any exciting developments in your world? Are you still analyzing things?" The table fell quiet. It was the moment they'd all been waiting for, the designated time to pity Julian. "Things are steady, Eleanor. Thank you for asking," he replied, his voice even. "Steady is good. Steady is safe," Richard said, patting Julian's shoulder with a proprietary air. "But you can't build an empire on steady, my boy. You know, I still have that opening in logistics if you ever want to get your hands dirty and learn how real business works. Start in the mailroom even. No shame in it. Work your way up." The offer was a well-worn stone they used to sharpen their contempt. He'd been making it for 5 years. Clara, sitting next to him, shifted uncomfortably. She didn't defend him. She never did. She just stared at her plate, her silence a form of quiet complicity. It was her role in these family dramas, the beautiful, tragic victim of her own poor marital choice. Her suffering was her shield. "I appreciate the offer, Richard, but I'm content where I am," Julian said. His hand, under the table, rested on the small leather journal in his pocket. He could feel its familiar shape, the solid presence of it. It was an anchor in this sea of condescension. Inside that journal was the 5-year projection for Apex Strategies, the boutique investment firm he had founded and built from the ground up. The firm whose name was whispered with awe in the real corridors of power. The firm that currently managed over $1 billion in assets. The firm whose quiet, unseen owner was the clerk they were all so busy pitying. Later, as dessert was served, Marcus cornered him by the vast window overlooking the pool. "Listen, Julian," he began, his tone oozing fake concern. "I know things must be tight. Clara mentioned you had to dip into savings for that vacation last year." Julian looked at his brother-in-law. Marcus, who lived in a condo paid for by his father, who drove a car leased by his father's company, and who was currently steering one of that company's biggest projects toward an iceberg. "We manage," Julian said simply. "Right. Well, look, I have this opportunity," Marcus said, leaning in. "It's a sure thing, a tech startup. I can get you in on the ground floor. 5 grand. It'll be worth 50 in a year. I'm just trying to help you out, for Clara's sake." Julian recognized the name of the startup. Apex Strategies had analyzed it 6 weeks ago. It was a shell company designed for a pump-and-dump scheme. It would be worthless in 6 months, and anyone invested would be lucky to avoid an SEC investigation. Marcus was either a fool or a crook, and Julian wasn't sure which was worse. "Thank you, Marcus, but I have a strict policy about mixing family and investments," Julian said. Marcus scoffed, his face twisting into a sneer. "Your policy? What, you have a policy against making money? Suit yourself. Don't come crying to me when you're still driving that pathetic little car in 5 years. I tried to help you. Remember that." He turned and walked away, already telling a nearby guest how he'd tried to give his sad sack brother-in-law a lifeline, but the man was too proud or too stupid to take it. Julian remained by the window, watching the reflection of the party. He saw Clara laughing with one of her mother's friends, the picture of grace and beauty. He saw Richard holding court, a king in his castle of glass and marble. He saw them all, so confident in their wealth, so secure in their superiority, so utterly blind. He had held his tongue that night, as he had on so many other nights. He did it for Clara. He did it because he believed that their private life, the quiet world he was building for them, was more real than this hollow performance. He believed her love was a separate thing from her family's disdain. He thought he was protecting her from their world, when in fact, she was a willing citizen of it. Now, sitting in his car outside the hospital, the memory of that dinner was no longer just another painful episode. It was evidence. It was part of a pattern, a long and damning history of contempt he had endured, and she had enabled. The words she'd spoken to the nurse were not an aberration. They were the purest distillation of everything she had been shown and everything she had come to believe. The humiliation she'd felt wasn't over asking her father for money. It was being married to a man her family had so successfully defined as a failure. His resolve hardened into something adamantine. The game wasn't about winning. It was about revealing the truth of who they were and the truth of who he was. And the truth, he knew, would be a far more devastating weapon than their money or their status could ever be. He would not start in the mailroom. He would buy the building. The days following Clara's discharge from the hospital were thick with a strange, oppressive silence. She had come home, pronounced perfectly healthy, her fainting spell attributed to low blood sugar and dehydration, and immediately slipped into the role of a delicate convalescent. Julian played his part too, that of the concerned husband, fetching her water, fluffing her pillows, and absorbing the family's renewed, cloying solicitude. But beneath the surface of these domestic rituals, a profound shift had occurred. The Julian who had existed before that moment in the hospital corridor was gone, replaced by a man observing his own life from a great and chilling distance. He watched Clara as she lay on the sofa, scrolling through her phone, a faint, perpetual frown on her face. He saw the way her eyes would flick over him when he entered a room, a quick, dismissive assessment. He was a piece of furniture she had grown tired of, one she was already mentally replacing with something better. The love he had once seen in her eyes, or thought he had seen, was gone. In its place was a flat, transactional appraisal. He was a liability. Her father, Richard, called twice a day, not to speak to Julian, but to Clara. Julian would answer the phone, his voice polite and steady. "Julian, put Clara on," Richard would command, dispensing with any pretense of pleasantry. One afternoon, 2 days after she was home, Richard varied his script. "Julian, is she there?" "She's resting, Richard. Can I take a message?" There was a huff on the other end of the line. "Fine. Listen, I've spoken to the hospital's billing department. Don't you worry about a thing. I've told them to send the invoice directly to my office. We'll take care of it." "That's very generous, Richard, but it's not necessary," Julian said, his voice betraying no emotion. "I have it handled." A short, barking laugh came through the receiver. "Handled? Julian, let's not play games. I know what you make. We're talking about a multi-day hospital stay with a battery of tests. This is going to be 5 figures, easily. Don't let your pride get in the way of your wife's well-being. It's done. I've already given them my corporate account details." The condescension was a physical force, a pressure against his ear. Richard wasn't just offering to pay a bill. He was staking a claim, reinforcing his role as the family patriarch, the provider, the one who stepped in where Julian inevitably failed. He was buying another brick in the wall of Julian's inadequacy. "I appreciate the thought, Richard," Julian said, his tone as cool and smooth as Riverstone. "But as I said, it's handled. I would appreciate it if you would call them back and retract your offer. It's my responsibility." "Your responsibility?" Richard sputtered, his voice rising in disbelief. "Don't be a fool. You can't afford this. Do you want collection agencies calling the house? Is that the kind of stress you want to put Clara under right now? Just say thank you, Julian, and let it be." "Thank you for the offer, Richard," Julian said, carefully enunciating each word. "I am declining it." There was a moment of stunned silence. Julian had never openly defied him before. He had absorbed, deflected, and endured, but he had never directly refused Richard's generosity. "You're an idiot," Richard finally hissed, the mask of paternal concern falling away to reveal the raw contempt beneath. "A proud, foolish man. When the bill comes and you can't pay it, don't you dare come crawling to me. You can explain to Clara why her credit is ruined because of your stupid pride." The line went dead. Julian calmly placed the receiver back in its cradle. He felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, just the quiet hum of the gears turning. He made a note in his mind. Step 1. Establish financial independence. He walked into his home office, a small, neat room that Clara called his hobby corner. On his desk was a sleek, powerful laptop that she assumed was a standard model from a big box store. He sat down and made 2 phone calls. The first was to the hospital's billing department. He spoke to a supervisor, his voice calm and authoritative. "My name is Julian Croft. My wife, Clara Croft, was a patient there, discharged yesterday. My father-in-law, Richard Sterling, may have contacted you about her bill. I need to ensure that under no circumstances is any information released to him, nor is any payment to be accepted from him or his company, Sterling Holdings. All invoices are to be sent directly to me. Is that understood?" He provided his personal identification details. The supervisor, responding to his tone of quiet command, assured him the account would be flagged and secured. He then paid the entire estimated bill, a figure just shy of $20,000, over the phone with his personal black card, the one he never used. The second call was to a man named Mr. Harrison, a senior partner at the most powerful corporate law firm in the city. Harrison was not just Julian's lawyer, he was a board member and trusted advisor for Apex Strategies. "Harrison," Julian said, dispensing with pleasantries. "It's Julian." "Julian, I trust you're well?" The older man's voice was gravelly and warm. "I am. Listen, something has come up. I need you to start drawing up the paperwork. Separation first, with the standard asset division framework. But I also need a full, confidential portfolio review of Sterling Holdings. I want to know their debt load, their creditors, their project liabilities, everything. Specifically, I want to know the exposure on a condominium project being managed by Marcus Sterling." There was a brief pause on the other end. Harrison was too professional to ask personal questions, but his mind was sharp. "I see," he said, the two words carrying a weight of understanding. "Will this be contentious?" "I expect it will be," Julian replied. "The other party is operating under a series of significant informational disadvantages. They believe my net worth is approximately 1,000th of what it actually is. They believe I am an employee, not an owner. They believe I am a liability, not a lender." Harrison let out a low whistle. "Understood. A strategic reveal. This requires a delicate touch. When do you anticipate making your move?" Julian looked out his office window at the manicured lawn of the home he had bought, a home Clara constantly complained was too small. "I'm not sure yet," he said. "They are about to make a series of very foolish assumptions. I think it's best to let them complete their narrative before I introduce my own." "Very well," Harrison said. "I'll be ready. The portfolio review will be on your desk in 48 hours. Julian, be careful." "I'm always careful, Harrison," Julian said. "That's the one thing they've never understood about me." He hung up the phone. The quiet of the house settled around him again. From the living room, he could hear the faint sound of the television, a reality show about wealthy women throwing drinks at each other, Clara's preferred soundtrack. He had always thought his secret was a gift he was waiting to give her, a grand surprise that would finally make her happy, that would finally earn him the respect of her family. Now he saw it for what it was, a weapon. Not a weapon for attack, but for defense. A shield, a mirror that he would, at the right moment, turn on them, forcing them to see a reflection so unexpected and so devastating it would shatter their world. The thought brought him no joy, only a grim, resolute sense of necessity. The clerk was preparing his ledger. A final accounting was coming. Clara's recovery was miraculously swift. Within a week of returning home, the delicate convalescent vanished, replaced by the restless, dissatisfied woman Julian knew so well. Her energy, once devoted to performing illness, now refocused on her primary grievance, their life. "This house is so dark," she complained one afternoon, standing in the middle of the living room Julian had thought was filled with light. "We need more windows, or a new house." "The Andersons are selling their place," she said a day later, scrolling through a real estate app on her phone. "It's twice the size of this, a proper home. Marcus and his girlfriend were looking at it." Julian, reading a financial journal, didn't look up. "That's nice," he said. His lack of reaction was a new and irritating development for her. Before, he would have engaged, gently explaining the budget, talking about their 5-year plan, the fictional, modest plan he had created for public consumption. His placid agreement now seemed like a dismissal. "Don't you even care, Julian?" she snapped, throwing her phone onto the sofa. "Don't you want more for us? For me?" "I want us to be happy, Clara," he said, turning a page. His calmness was a wall she couldn't seem to scale. The tension in the house grew, a low-grade hum of resentment. It was the quiet before the storm, and Julian could feel the barometric pressure dropping with every passing hour. He continued his work, his routine unchanged on the surface. He left for his office every morning and returned at the same time every evening. No one knew that his office was now the gleaming, top-floor headquarters of Apex Strategies, a space he had been secretly leasing for 6 months and had only recently begun to occupy. His small satellite office in a suburban complex, the one her family knew about, now sat empty. The preliminary report from Harrison arrived in a sealed, confidential envelope delivered by a private courier. Julian read it in his home office that night. It was exactly as he'd suspected, only worse. Sterling Holdings was a house of cards. Richard had leveraged the company to its absolute limit, borrowing against assets to fund risky ventures like Marcus's condo project. That project in particular was a disaster. It was over budget, behind schedule, and the primary lender was a vulture fund known for its ruthless foreclosure tactics. Richard wasn't a king in a castle. He was a gambler on a losing streak, desperately doubling down in the hopes of a miracle. And then Julian saw the name of the secondary lender, the one holding a smaller but critical piece of the debt on the condo project. It was a holding company called Northwood Investments. Julian smiled, a thin, cold smile. Northwood Investments was a subsidiary of Apex Strategies. He had bought that debt package 3 months ago as a standard portfolio diversification. He hadn't even made the connection until now. He, Julian Croft, the man with the soul of a clerk, was one of his father-in-law's creditors. The irony was so thick, so potent, it was almost poetic. Richard, in his arrogance, had no idea. To him, Northwood Investments was just another faceless entity on a balance sheet. He had no clue that the man he offered to hire in his mailroom held the power to push his entire empire into default. The moment of truth was precipitated, as he knew it would be, by Clara. It happened on a Friday evening, 2 weeks after the hospital stay. Julian was in the kitchen making dinner, something he often did. He found the methodical process of chopping vegetables and searing meat to be calming. Clara walked in, dressed to go out. "Where are you going?" he asked, his voice neutral. "Out," she said, touching up her lipstick in the reflection of the microwave door. "My parents are taking me and Marcus out to celebrate. The first phase of funding for the condo tower came through." Julian knew what that meant. It meant Marcus had likely secured another high-interest loan to pay off the initial contractors, digging the hole even deeper. It was not a celebration. It was a desperate gasp for air. "They didn't invite me?" Julian asked, though he already knew the answer. Clara finally looked at him, her expression a mixture of pity and exasperation. "Julian, please. It's a family thing. Besides, you hate these things. All the business talk. It just goes over your head." "I see," he said, turning back to the stove. "And we need to talk," she said, her voice shifting. It was the tone she used when she was about to deliver a verdict. "When I get back, us, it isn't working. I think you know that." "I know," he said, his voice quiet. Her brow furrowed. She had expected a fight, pleading, confusion. His simple, solemn agreement threw her off balance. "Oh," she said. "Well, good. That makes it easier then." "What did you want to talk about specifically?" he asked, plating the meal he had cooked. He placed one plate on the counter for himself. The other he covered and put in the refrigerator. "The house, the money," she said, waving a hand dismissively as if these were trivial details. "Daddy and I have already talked it through. He's going to help me find a good lawyer. Obviously, you can't afford to keep this house, so we'll sell it. I'll take the majority of the proceeds naturally, since my family's money went into the down payment." This was a lie. Julian had paid the entire down payment himself from his pre-Apex salary and savings. "Daddy's being very generous. He's not even going to ask you to pay him back for my hospital bill." The quiet in the kitchen was absolute. Julian slowly wiped his hands on a dish towel. He looked at his wife, at her beautiful, selfish face, and felt a profound sense of sorrow. Not for himself, but for her. For the catastrophic miscalculation she was making, a mistake that would redefine her entire life. "Clara," he said, and his voice was so low and steady she had to lean in to hear it. "I think it's time we had a talk as well, but not when you get back. Now, before you go, please call your parents and Marcus. Ask them to come here instead." She stared at him, bewildered. "Come here? Why on earth would they do that?" "Because," Julian said, meeting her gaze without a trace of anger or weakness, "I am about to have a conversation about your father's business, and I believe it's one he and you will want to hear in person. Tell him it's about Northwood Investments." He saw the flicker of confusion in her eyes. The name meant nothing to her, but he was betting it would mean everything to Richard. "What is that? What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice laced with irritation. "Just make the call, Clara," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Tell them to cancel their reservation. Dinner is on me." He turned back to his plate and began to eat, a condemned man enjoying his last meal in a prison of their making. Except he wasn't the one in prison, and it wasn't his last meal. It was the overture. The storm was no longer coming. It had arrived. An hour later, they were all assembled in the living room, the room Clara found so dark and small. Richard, Eleanor, and Marcus had arrived not with curiosity, but with an air of collective annoyance, as if responding to a summons from a disobedient servant. They had walked in without knocking, Richard leading the way, his face a mask of thunderous impatience. "All right, Julian, what is this?" Richard demanded, remaining standing while Eleanor and Marcus arranged themselves on the sofa like judges. "Clara said you were talking nonsense about one of my lenders. You have 60 seconds to explain why you've dragged us all over here and ruined our evening." Clara stood near her father, positioned firmly on their side of the invisible line that had just been drawn down the center of the room. She looked at Julian with a kind of detached pity, as if he were a stray animal about to be put down. She had told them, of course. She had told them on the phone that Julian was being weird and that their marriage was over. Their expressions made it clear they saw this as the final, pathetic act of a desperate man. Julian sat in his usual armchair, the one they had always subtly mocked as being old and worn. He was calm. The frantic energy they had brought into the room seemed to break against his stillness. He had a glass of water on the small table beside him. Next to it lay the worn leather journal. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice as quiet and measured as ever. "I know you had plans, and I apologize for the disruption. But Clara is right. We do need to talk. About many things." He looked at Clara. "You said when you came in that this isn't working, that our marriage is over. And you are correct. It is." Clara flinched, surprised again by his directness. Richard scoffed. "We know, Julian. Clara told us. Let's get to the point. This is about money, isn't it? You're going to try and get some kind of settlement out of her, is that it? Let me tell you right now, my boy, you will not see a single dime." "On the contrary, Richard," Julian said, his eyes shifting to his father-in-law, "the money is precisely the point. But you have the direction of the currency flow entirely wrong." He paused, letting the silence stretch. Marcus snickered. "What's that supposed to mean? You going to pay us for the privilege of getting rid of you?" Julian ignored him. He picked up the leather journal, holding it in his lap. "For 7 years," he began, his voice low but carrying to every corner of the room, "I have sat at your dinner table. I have attended your family functions, and I have listened. I have listened to you describe my job as little. I have listened to you call my car pathetic. I have listened to you question my ambition, my intelligence, and my worth as a husband and as a man." He wasn't looking at them with anger. He was looking at them with the detached precision of an auditor. This was not a plea for sympathy. It was the beginning of an indictment. "You, Eleanor," he said, his gaze finding his mother-in-law, who stiffened. Have pitied your daughter for being married to me, for the sacrifices she has had to make. You, Marcus, he turned to his brother-in-law, have condescendingly offered me hot tips on investments that you knew were worthless, assuming I was too stupid to see it. And you, Richard, his eyes finally locked on the patriarch, have repeatedly offered me a job in your mailroom. You have called me a fool. You have assumed at every turn that I was a financial incompetent, a man on the verge of ruin. And you, Clara, he said, his voice softening with a genuine, deep-seated pain that was for him alone. You stood by and let it happen. And worse, you came to believe it yourself. You told a nurse, a stranger, that I was a man with no vision, that being with me was killing you, and that my financial state was so precarious that a minor health scare would wipe us out. You felt humiliated, not by your family's cruelty, but by my perceived failure. The air in the room was thick and heavy. Clara's face had gone pale. Richard's was turning a dangerous shade of purple. This was not the pathetic pleading they had expected. This was a list of grievances delivered with chilling accuracy. What is the point of all this, Julian? Clara whispered, her voice trembling. The point, Julian said, is the truth. You have all built your lives, your family dynamic, your very identities around a series of assumptions. The primary assumption being that I am a man of modest means and limited prospects. That assumption is incorrect. He leaned forward slightly. Let's start with the hospital bill, Richard. The one you so generously insisted on paying. You called me a proud, foolish man for refusing your help. The truth is I paid that bill in full, with cash, from an account you don't know about, within an hour of your phone call. Richard stared, speechless. Now let's talk about my little job, Julian continued. You are all under the impression that I am a mid-level financial analyst for a generic firm in a suburban office park. That was true for a time, but I left that job over 2 years ago. What? Clara breathed. But you go to work every day. I do, Julian said. I go to my actual office, the one on the 48th floor of the downtown financial tower, the headquarters of a company I founded 3 years ago, a boutique investment firm called Apex Strategies. The name hung in the air. Richard's eyes widened in dawning horror. He knew that name. Every serious player in the city knew that name. Apex was a ghost, a legend, a firm that came out of nowhere and hadn't made a single bad move, managing money for the wealthiest and most discreet clients. That's impossible, Marcus stammered. Apex is run by some kind of recluse. No one knows who he is. Julian allowed himself a small, sad smile. You are looking at him, he said simply. He opened the leather journal. The first page was not writing, but a neatly folded certificate of incorporation for Apex Strategies. Founder and CEO, Julian Croft. You thought this was a diary, he said softly. It's a business plan, the one you said I was incapable of having. The statement landed, simple, devastating, final. The entire power dynamic of the room, of their lives, of the past 7 years, shattered in that single moment. The man they had pitied, the man they had mocked, the clerk, the failure, was one of the most powerful and wealthiest men in the city. The silence that followed was not empty. It was filled with the sound of a world breaking. The shock in the room was a physical thing, a palpable wave that left everyone frozen in its wake. Richard Sterling, a man whose entire being was built on bluster and dominance, looked as though he had been struck by lightning. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Eleanor had a hand pressed to her chest, her face a mask of disbelief. Marcus just stared, his earlier smirk wiped clean, replaced by a slack-jawed vacancy. And Clara, Julian's eyes found his wife. She was looking at him as if for the first time. The man she thought she knew, the simple, steady, unambitious man, had evaporated, replaced by this stranger sitting in the worn armchair. A stranger who held a quiet, devastating power she could not comprehend. Her expression was a chaotic storm of confusion, fear, and a dawning, horrified awe. "You're lying," Richard finally managed to rasp, his voice a dry whisper. It was a reflex, a desperate denial of a reality his mind refused to accept. "This is some kind of sick joke, a trick." Julian did not rise to the bait. He remained seated, his posture unchanged. "Was it a trick, Richard? When Apex Strategies passed on the Henderson property deal 3 months before your killer son overpaid for it, we analyzed the numbers. The project is a financial black hole, a fact you are likely becoming aware of right about now." Marcus flinched as if he'd been physically struck. How could you know that?" "It's my business to know," Julian said, his voice still level, still calm. "I am an analyst, after all. It's what I do. I analyze things." He repeated Eleanor's condescending words from the anniversary dinner, and the barb, so subtle, landed with precision. "I analyze risk, and your family, Richard, is a catastrophic risk." He let that statement settle before he delivered the final, crushing blow. "You mentioned I was talking nonsense about one of your lenders," Julian continued, his gaze returning to Richard. "The lender for the condo project. You have a primary, a vulture fund that is about to demand a crippling penalty payment for your construction delays. And you have a secondary lender, a smaller one, a company called Northwood Investments." Richard's face went from purple to a ghastly, waxy white. He knew. "Northwood Investments holds the second position lien on the Henderson property," Julian explained, for the benefit of the others in the room. "A position that becomes critical if the primary lender forecloses. Northwood has the right to buy out the primary's position and take control of the entire project for pennies on the dollar." He paused, then added, "Northwood Investments is a wholly owned subsidiary of Apex Strategies. I bought your debt, Richard, 3 months ago. It was just another Tuesday." The sound that escaped Richard's throat was a strangled gasp. He stumbled back a step and sank heavily onto the arm of the sofa, his massive frame suddenly looking deflated and old. He wasn't just looking at his disappointing son-in-law anymore. He was looking at the man who held his entire professional life in the palm of his hand. The man he had offered a job in the mailroom now owned his failure. "But why?" Clara whispered, her voice trembling. The question was not one of strategy, but of betrayal. "Why would you do this? Why would you hide it all from me?" Julian finally looked at her, and for the first time, the cool mask of the strategist cracked, revealing the wounded husband beneath. "Hide it?" he asked, his voice raw with a pain he had suppressed for years. "I didn't hide it, Clara. I was building it. For you. For us. I was building a life of such complete and total security that you would never have to worry about anything ever again. I was building a fortress to protect you from the very attitudes your family espouses, this toxic belief that a person's worth is measured by the car they drive or the label on their suit." He leaned forward, his voice dropping. "I had a moment planned. A day I would take you to the top of my building, show you the city spread out below us, and hand you the keys to a kingdom you never knew existed. I thought it would be the happiest day of our lives. I thought you would see me, the real me." His gaze hardened. "But then I stood outside your hospital room, and I heard you. I heard you describe our life as a nightmare. I heard you call me a man with no vision. I heard you, the person I was doing it all for, describe me as a financial burden you were planning to shed. And I realized in that moment that you would never see me. You don't look at a person's foundation. You only look at the paint. You had already condemned the building before you even knew what it was made of." Tears were streaming down Clara's face now. Not tears of remorse, but tears of shock and self-pity. The life she had been dreaming of, the wealth and status she craved, had been there all along, hidden in plain sight, and she had been utterly blind to it. And worse, She had just declared her intention to divorce the man who held it all. "So no, Richard," Julian said, his attention snapping back to the broken man on the sofa. "I am not here to ask for a dime. In fact, the financial discussion is going to go the other way. We are going to talk about the terms of my separation from your daughter, and then we are going to discuss the terms of the loan held by Northwood Investments." He closed the leather journal and placed it deliberately on the table. The quiet, unassuming object now seemed to radiate power. "The man with the soul of a clerk is ready to see you now," he said, his voice flat and final. "The meeting has just begun." The immediate aftermath was chaos, but a quiet, imploding kind of chaos. The bluster and arrogance of the Sterling family had been punctured, and the vacuum it left was filled with a panicked, desperate energy. Richard Sterling, who had commanded every room he entered for 40 years, seemed to have shrunk. He sat hunched on the sofa, his face ashen, his eyes darting from Julian to the leather journal on the table as if it were a bomb. The gears of his mind were grinding, trying to process the scale of his misjudgment, the sheer, catastrophic depth of his error. He had not just insulted his son-in-law, he had mocked his own creditor, a man who held the power of financial life and death over him. Marcus was a statue of disbelief. His entire worldview, a simple hierarchy with his father at the top and Julian near the bottom, had been inverted. The sure-thing investments, the leverage he bragged about, it was all childish posturing in the face of the silent, strategic power Julian had just revealed. He looked at Julian with a new expression: fear. Eleanor, ever attuned to the social currents, was the first to recalibrate. Her expression of shock slowly morphed into one of calculation. She looked from Julian, the newfound titan of industry, to her daughter, the woman who was about to divorce him. Her mind was not on the family business, it was on the family's social standing. She saw the colossal social blunder they had made, the invitations they would not receive, the alliances that would crumble. And Clara, she stood frozen in the middle of the room, tears tracking through her makeup. "Julian, I didn't know," she stammered, the words tumbling out. "You have to believe me. If I had known—" "If you had known what, Clara?" Julian interrupted, his voice cutting through her plea. It wasn't cruel, but it was firm, the voice of a man who would no longer accept excuses. "If you had known I was wealthy, you would have loved me more? You would have respected me. You would have defended me from your family's insults." He stood up, for the first time looking down on them, not just morally, but physically. That is the entire point. A person's worth, their character, their integrity, it doesn't change when their bank balance does. Mine didn't. I was the same man a month ago as I am today. The only thing that has changed is your perception of me. And what you've shown me is that your perception, your respect, even your love, is for sale. It can be bought. I just didn't know the price was so high. "That's not fair," she cried, taking a step toward him. "I do love you." "Do you?" Julian asked, his voice laced with a profound and weary sadness. "Or do you love what you now think I can give you? The house you want, the status you crave. The woman I heard in that hospital room wasn't in love with me. She was ashamed of me. And that shame, Clara, is something I will never forget." The doorbell rang. The sound was sharp, precise, cutting through the thick emotional atmosphere. Everyone startled, except for Julian. He had been expecting it. "That will be my lawyer," he said calmly. He walked to the door and opened it. Standing on the doorstep was Mr. Harrison. He was an older gentleman, impeccably dressed in a dark suit, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a presence that radiated quiet authority. He carried a fine leather briefcase. "Harrison, thank you for coming," Julian said. "Julian," Harrison nodded, stepping inside. He took in the scene in the living room in a single, sweeping glance. The broken patriarch, the frightened son, the calculating mother, the weeping wife. His expression didn't change. "Everyone," Julian said, turning back to the room, "this is my legal counsel and a board member of my company, Mr. David Harrison. I've asked him to join us to facilitate the discussion." The arrival of Harrison was a masterstroke. It shifted the confrontation from a messy family drama into a formal proceeding. It lent an undeniable, official weight to Julian's claims. Richard Sterling knew who Harrison was. David Harrison was a legend, a lawyer who only represented the most powerful interests in the city. His presence here was irrefutable proof. "Mr. Sterling," Harrison said, his voice a gravelly baritone. He gave a slight nod to Richard, who looked up at him like a drowning man seeing a battleship sail past. Harrison's gaze was not unkind, but it was utterly uncompromising. Harrison placed his briefcase on the dining room table and opened it with a series of quiet, decisive clicks. He took out two thick document folders. "As Julian indicated," Harrison began, his voice filling the suddenly silent house, "we have two matters to discuss this evening. The first is the dissolution of the marriage between Julian and Clara Croft. The second is the debt obligation of Sterling Holdings to Northwood Investments." He slid the first folder across the table toward Clara. "This is a standard separation agreement. Julian has been extraordinarily generous. He is not seeking to reclaim the funds he used for the down payment on this house. He is prepared to sign the house over to you, free and clear, along with a one-time alimony payment that will ensure your financial stability for the foreseeable future." Clara stared at the folder as if it were a snake. This was it. The end. But it was an end that came with a golden parachute she had done nothing to earn. It was charity. "However," Harrison continued, his tone hardening slightly, "that offer is contingent on a smooth and amicable process. Any contestation, any attempt to lay claim to Julian's personal or business assets will result in this offer being rescinded, and we will proceed to a full forensic accounting of all marital assets. A process, I assure you, will not be favorable to you." He then turned his attention to Richard, picking up the second folder. "The second matter. Sterling Holdings is currently in technical default on its loan covenants with Northwood Investments due to project delays and cost overruns. As of this moment, we have the legal right to accelerate your loan, demanding full payment or to seize the asset, the Henderson property." Richard finally found his voice, a weak, pleading croak. "Julian, son, please, you can't. It would ruin me. It would ruin everything." Julian looked at the man who had belittled him for years, now begging him for mercy. He felt no triumph, only a hollow ache. This was the ugliness he had always sought to avoid. "Ruin you?" Julian said softly. "The way this hospital bill was going to wipe us out? The way my stupid pride was going to ruin Clara's credit?" He echoed Richard's own words back to him, the moral mirror reflecting the man's own cruelty. "I am not you, Richard. I don't find sport in the destruction of others. But I will no longer be a party to your delusions. You are a reckless businessman, and you have put your family and your employees at risk." He looked at Harrison, then back at Richard. "We are not here to ruin you. We are here to offer you a choice, a way out. But it will be on my terms, not yours." The power had not just shifted. It had been fundamentally, irrevocably, and completely redefined. The clerk was now the banker. The fool was now the master. And the family that had built its identity on a throne of arrogance was now kneeling at the feet of the man they had tried so hard to keep under their heel. The choice Julian offered was as strategic and devastating as everything else he had done that evening. It was not a simple reprieve. It was a complete restructuring of their reality. "Mr." Harrison laid out the terms with the dispassionate precision of a surgeon. "Here is the offer regarding Sterling Holdings," he announced, his voice commanding the absolute attention of everyone in the room. "Apex Strategies, through its subsidiary Northwood Investments, is prepared to acquire a controlling interest, 51%, of Sterling Holdings. Richard's head snapped up. Acquire? You want to take my company? Not take, Richard, Julian corrected him gently. Save. Your company is insolvent. The Vulture Fund holding your primary debt is scheduled to make a capital call in 10 days. A call you cannot meet. When you fail to meet it, they will foreclose, and your company will be dismantled for parts. Your legacy will be gone. Your employees will be jobless. You will be bankrupt. Harrison continued, our acquisition would involve a complete buyout of the primary lender's position. We will inject the necessary capital to stabilize the company and see the Henderson project through to completion under our management. We will honor all your obligations to your employees and suppliers. We will save the company. And what happens to me? Richard asked, his voice small. You will be offered a position, Harrison said, President Emeritus. You will retain a salary and a seat on the board, but you will have no operational control. You will serve in an advisory capacity. The day-to-day running of the company will be overseen by a new CEO, appointed by Apex. The terms were a public humiliation wrapped in a life raft. Richard would keep his title, his salary, his office. He would maintain the outward appearance of success, but he would be a king in name only, a figurehead in the company he had once ruled. The power would belong to Julian. Every day, Richard would have to go to work in a company that was no longer his, saved from his own folly by the man he had despised. It was a prison of gilded bars. And Marcus? Eleanor asked, her voice thin and trembling. She looked at her son, who seemed to have shrunk into the sofa cushions. Marcus will be reassigned, Julian said, his gaze falling on his brother-in-law. He will no longer be in charge of development. He has proven himself unsuited for that role. We have an opening in our logistics department. It's a junior management position. He will have to work his way up, earn his place. There's no shame in it. He used Richard's exact words, the ones offered to him at the anniversary dinner. The echo was perfect, the parallel structure a masterpiece of poetic justice. Marcus's face flushed with a deep, burning shame. He would not be starting in the mailroom, but it was the next closest thing. He would be working under the direct authority of people who answered to Julian. This is the only offer, Harrison stated firmly. You have 24 hours to accept. If you decline, we will allow events to run their natural course. We will not be merciful twice. He then turned back to Clara. And the separation agreement, the house, the alimony. A generous offer, as I said. It is on the table for the same 24-hour period. Clara looked from the divorce papers to Julian, her mind reeling. The man she was divorcing was not just rich. He was about to become the owner of her father's company, the silent power behind her family's entire existence. Divorcing him meant severing herself from the very source of the power and status she had always craved. Julian, wait, she pleaded, taking a step toward him, her hands outstretched. We don't have to do this. I was wrong. I was so wrong. I was blind. I was stupid. Please, don't leave me. We can fix this. I can change. Her plea was desperate, laced with the raw terror of loss. Not the loss of a husband, but the loss of a future she had only just discovered. Julian looked at her, and the anger in his eyes was gone, replaced by a deep, hollow sadness. He saw the woman he had fallen in love with, the woman he had wanted to spend his life with. But he also saw the stranger from the hospital room, the woman whose respect was conditional, whose love was transactional. Change, Clara, he asked softly. What would you change? If I had walked in here tonight and simply asked for a divorce, you would have been relieved. You would have called your father, who would have crushed me with his lawyers, and you would have taken this house and more. You are not asking to fix this because you have had a sudden revelation about your love for me. You are asking because you have had a sudden revelation about my balance sheet. He held up a hand to stop her next protest. I do believe you are sorry, but you are sorry for the consequences, not for the actions. You are sorry you got caught. You are sorry you misjudged the situation so completely, but the person who said those things to the nurse, that person is real. That is the person you are when you think no one who matters is listening. He stepped back, creating a physical distance between them. I cannot build a future with that person. I cannot live my life wondering if your affection is real or if it's just a performance for the wealthy man you now know me to be. I need a partner whose loyalty isn't dependent on my net worth. I need a partner who would defend me in the mailroom, not just in the boardroom. His words were a final verdict. There was no appeal. The offers stand, Julian said, his voice regaining its quiet authority as he addressed the whole family. Mr. Harrison has the documents. You know the terms. You have 24 hours. With that, he turned and walked toward the door. He didn't look back. Julian, where are you going? Clara cried out, her voice breaking. He paused at the door, his back to them. I'm going to a hotel, he said. This is your house now, Clara, as I said. He opened the door and walked out into the night, leaving them behind in the ruins of the world they had built. Mr. Harrison remained behind, a silent, implacable sentinel standing guard over the new reality, his presence a guarantee that the terms would be met. The quiet before the storm was over. The storm had passed, and now the long, difficult work of cleaning up the wreckage would begin. The 24 hours that followed were a crucible for the Sterling family. Julian remained unreachable at a downtown hotel suite that was larger and more luxurious than their entire ground floor. He left them to their choice, stewing in the consequences of their own actions. Mr. Harrison served as the sole point of contact, a dispassionate wall of professionalism against which their panic and pleading broke ineffectually. For Richard, the choice was an agony of pride versus survival. Accepting Julian's offer meant surrendering his crown, admitting his failure, and becoming a subordinate in his own kingdom. Declining it meant total annihilation. He spent hours on the phone with his own lawyers, who confirmed the grim reality. His company was exposed, the loan covenants were breached, and Julian's position was unassailable. They advised him to take the deal. It was, they said, a miracle. For Marcus, it was a descent into a new and terrifying reality. The world no longer revolved around him and his father. He was facing the prospect of actual work, of accountability, of starting over without the safety net of nepotism. He raged, he sulked, and then finally, he fell silent, the weight of his own mediocrity crushing him. For Clara, it was the most profound crisis of all. She was presented with two paths. One was to sign the papers, take the house and the generous settlement, and walk away from Julian forever. This would give her financial independence, but it would be a gilded cage, a constant reminder of the empire she had forfeited through her own blindness and lack of faith. The other path was to refuse, to fight, to try and hold on to him. But Julian's words echoed in her mind. A fight would lead to her ruin, and even if she won some small legal victory, she would lose him completely. She spent the night pacing the floors of the house that was now hers, a house that suddenly felt like a mausoleum. Every object, the sofa, the art on the walls, the very air she breathed, was a testament to Julian's quiet provision, a life she had taken for granted and actively scorned. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw, for the first time, not the tragic victim, but the fool. The woman who held the winning lottery ticket in her hand for 7 years and used it as a bookmark. By morning, the decision was made. There was no other choice. Richard Sterling, his face aged a decade overnight, called Mr. Harrison and accepted the terms of the acquisition. The official signing would take place the following week. Clara, her hands trembling, signed the separation agreement. She did not contest a single clause. She accepted the house, the alimony, the end. It was an act of surrender. The resolution began not with a bang, but with the quiet, methodical turning of legal and financial gears. Julian, from his temporary headquarters, oversaw the transition. He appointed a new CEO for Sterling Holdings, a sharp, experienced woman from within his own firm, who immediately began the difficult process of stabilizing the company. Marcus was, as promised, reassigned. He showed up for his first day in the logistics department looking lost and defeated. His new boss, a woman who had worked her way up from the warehouse floor, treated him with professional courtesy but no deference. He was just another employee, expected to pull his weight. The experience would either break him or, just possibly, remake him. Richard attended the first new board meeting of his old company. He sat at the long table, a ghost at the feast, listening as Julian's appointed CEO laid out a clear, decisive, and brilliant plan to save the very projects he had nearly driven into the ground. At the head of the table, participating via video conference from his own office, was Julian. He was polite, respectful even, to his father-in-law. He asked for Richard's historical perspective on certain matters. But the power dynamic was absolute. Julian was in command. Richard was a relic. And Clara began her new life, alone. The house was quiet, the silence a constant accusation. Her friends, who had once commiserated with her about her unambitious husband, now looked at her with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. She was the woman who had let a prince slip through her fingers. Her mother, Eleanor, vacillated between blaming Clara for the disaster and scheming for ways to get back into Julian's good graces. The family, once a united front of arrogance, was fractured and broken. 2 months after that fateful night, Julian agreed to meet Clara. Not at the house, but at a neutral location, a quiet cafe downtown. She arrived first, looking thinner, her expensive clothes somehow not fitting the way they used to. When Julian walked in, a few heads turned. His picture had been in the business journals after the Sterling acquisition. He was no longer anonymous. He sat down opposite her, ordering a simple coffee. He looked the same calm eyes, the same quiet demeanor, but he was different. The defensiveness was gone, replaced by an unshakable and settled authority. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, her voice soft. "Clara," he nodded. I've been doing a lot of thinking," she began, her hands twisting a napkin in her lap. "About everything you said. You were right. About all of it. I was shallow, and I was blind. I didn't see you. I just saw the story my family told about you, and I was too weak to write my own." She looked up and her eyes were clear, the frantic desperation replaced by a sad, hard-won clarity. "I'm not here to ask you to come back. I know that's impossible. I forfeited that right. I wanted to apologize. Properly. Not because of the money, but because I broke something that should have been precious. I broke your trust. I dishonored the man you were, the man I should have been proud of, long before I knew about Apex strategies." Julian listened, his expression unreadable. He saw a flicker of the woman he had once loved, a glimmer of genuine remorse in the wreckage of their marriage. "I accept your apology, Clara," he said, and he meant it. Forgiveness, he was learning, was not for the other person. It was for himself. It was the only way to truly move on. "What will you do now?" she asked. "I will continue my work," he said, "and I will try to find a life partner who values integrity above assets." The words were not meant to be cruel, but they were the simple truth. They sat in silence for a moment longer. The chasm between them was too vast to be bridged. "I hope you find happiness, Julian," she said finally, her voice thick with unshed tears. "You deserve it." "I hope you do too, Clara," he replied. "I truly do." He stood up, left money for both their coffees, and walked out of the cafe, not looking back. The final thread was cut. He was free. The story of Julian Croft and the Sterling family became a quiet legend in the city's financial circles. It was a morality tale whispered in boardrooms and at cocktail parties. It was a story about a man who won a war without ever raising his voice, who achieved the ultimate victory not through vengeance, but through the simple, irrefutable power of the truth. Julian's firm, Apex Strategies, continued to thrive. He remained its quiet, guiding force, a man whose wealth was second only to his integrity. He eventually did find a new partner, an architect who was as brilliant and as unimpressed by status as he was. They built a life together, a structure founded on mutual respect, honesty, and a shared vision that had nothing to do with money. Richard Sterling lived out his days as a figurehead, a walking monument to the perils of arrogance. His company, under its new leadership, became more successful than ever, a fact that was a source of both pride and perpetual humiliation for him. Clara, with the security of the settlement Julian had given her, never had to worry about money again. But she was a lonely figure. She had the wealth she always thought she wanted, but she learned the hard way that true worth cannot be measured by appearances, and that the most valuable assets are the ones that cannot be bought. Trust, loyalty, and integrity. She spent her life in the shadow of the great man she had failed to see. And so, the quiet clerk, the underestimated hero, found his resolution, not in the downfall of his antagonists, but in the affirmation of his own values. He had faced humiliation with dignity, wielded immense power with restraint, and chosen justice over revenge. His story serves as a powerful reminder that the strongest foundations are not built of steel and glass, but of character, and that sometimes the most powerful voice in the room is the quietest one. What do you think is the most important lesson from Julian's story? Is it about the dangers of judging others, or the importance of staying true to yourself, even when no one else sees your worth? I'd love to read your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this story of vindication in quiet strength meaningful, please give it a like and subscribe for more tales of justice and redemption. Thank you for joining me on this journey.